what our nervous system is like. And really balancing that to, like, for me personally, answer a really simple question is like, how do we all live really good lives knowing that like in 100 years we're gone, right? And the internet has kind of thrown this beautifully wild wrench into that whole experience, because it's really shifted everything about what it means to be a human in a really, really short period of time, and also illuminated things in ways that is almost unfathomable to the human mind. Like, we can see and understand things in ways today that 30 years ago you didn't even know existed, right? And for good, that's, you know, the 12 of us getting on a call and having a Zoom here. For the bad, that's understanding what's happening in every country around the world in real time. And so I just kind of sit there and think about and play with these things all day, and then try and bring them back down to the space of like, what the fuck do I do with that? And so when Joss kind of asked me to kind of share my thoughts on content, I was thinking about it, and really I was going to like go to the granular level, but I decided I want to stay at a higher level, because I think the problem with content right now is not, you know, how do we post reels and all that types of stuff. It's like, what actually is this thing called content, and what are we doing with it? And how do we use it to make lives better rather than, you know, kind of, and I think it was Jenna said it, is she has like resistance to this and what we're doing. And I think all of us do, because right now we're using it for really messed up purposes and nobody really knows what the fuck's going on with it. And what I see is that the world has moved from this place where the influencer was a completely fake and fabricated thing to a space that is getting more and more real and more vulnerable and more expressive for all of us to just put whatever we are out there. And the people that are winning now are the people that find their lane, love that space, and create community around it. And that trend won't go away because it's the truest trend that resonates with all of us. And so as I was thinking about that, I decided just to kind of build the entire kind of presentation around that, running through kind of my philosophy, where I'm coming from, just to give you context about it. Then get into kind of where I see the space of content being. And then I'll jump into like how I actually think about building content, going kind of into some examples, but keeping that high level. And then kind of finally finishing off with just, in my experience, what it's like to create content, because of the fundamental understanding that creating content feels nothing like consuming content. And I think for a lot of us, that's a really weird gap that we don't talk enough about. And it is the difference between the professional artist and the person that wants to create but never paints. And if you can understand and bridge that gap, you'll give yourself a lot of permission internally to just bring yourself to the world. And for me personally, why all of this matters is because I fundamentally believe humanity is unbelievably good. When you go around a room of 1,000 people, the majority of them are awesome. They're passionate, they're engaged, they want to care, they want to be kind. And the more we can individually express ourselves, the more beautiful the world will become. And I think when we start to really understand that, and understand that these platforms that for, you know, the last 10 years have been mostly used to just print money for a small number of people, are actually the greatest platforms in the world for expression. Like, the second we actually bridge that gap and own that, we are going to see an absolute step change in the level of consciousness in this world. And for me, that just gets me super fucking excited, because the future we're going into, if we shape it right, is going to be wildly beautiful. And it's going to be weird, and it's going to be different, and it's going to be nothing like the world we came from. But if you believe humanity's good, then this is just a call to literally use content to express your soul. And if we do that, the world will move to the space we're at, because most people don't want to be in the world that we're currently in, because it feels fabricated and it feels fake. And so with that, I'm going to quickly run through this presentation. Josh, you want to throw on screen sharing? There's tons of slides. I'm going to move kind of fairly quick as I go through them, but if you guys have questions, feel free to just kind of stop, ask questions, put up your hand. Joss, if you want to moderate that, that would be sick.
totally. If you guys, as we kind of run here, if you guys want to shoot me questions or in the chat, I'll kind of pop, make sure they pop up. And then also at the end, we can all hang out and chat and be jolly and merry.
Hey,
Yeah.
Julian, go with the flow, my friend.
Sweet.
Flow with the go.
Flow with the go. Yeah, to be fair, I finished this presentation at 4:57 p.m. So, and that's another really cool kind of philosophy that I'll get into is like when it's just your thoughts, it doesn't need to be rehearsed, right?
Wow. Can I say something?
Andrews.
Julian or Julian? How is it?
Julio.
Okay, I have a German background, so I call it Julian. Julio, first of all, thank you so much for sharing this. I actually got goosebumps because I also love the perception of that humanity is good, and we don't only attract what we are internally, but we create also that what we are internally. So I love it. I love to see, of course, not everything is nice and positive, but to just want to change things to a good, to good. That's fantastic. I love it. Thank you so much.
Love it.
Beautiful.
Sweet. All right. Anything else from anyone before we dive in?
Send it.
All right, send it. So yeah, just before we quickly dive in, this is not some big grand philosophy. It is definitely not an X-step process to content creation. I am not the person for that. There's lots of people that are good at that. This is just my thoughts on the world and where we are headed, and content is becoming a huge part of it and will continue to become a huge part of it. It is from both a 50,000-foot view and a 5-foot view. And so I try and go from like, what does it mean for 4 billion people to be able to have a voice at one time? And what does it mean for me to be able to share my passions at a time? And realizing that the 4 billion people is just the accumulation of 4 billion individuals sharing their thoughts. I really, really look at this as a living, breathing organism that is constantly changing and interacting in real time. And every organism is part of systems. And the reason why that actually really, really matters is that if you understand the system, you can start to understand the different parts, which understand the different functions, which allow us to figure out where this thing might be headed. And the thing that really, really I struggled with in the beginning, especially when I was thinking about content, is like it was continuously overwhelming because, you know, by the time you nailed one platform, another platform came up. And then by the time you nailed that, somebody came in and bought it and changed it. And it was just this thing where I'm like, how do you keep up? And when I started to think about it as this organism that simply has, you know, creators producing content and businesses trying to extract money and people trying to get validation and really simple things that allow us to kind of understand it, you can start to see where this might be headed. And if you look at it from 10 years ago till today, there's very, very simple themes of more expression, more channels, more complexity, more niching down that become really, really simple themes that then you can start to build a career on or a outsourced identity or your persona on without feeling that like anxious overwhelmingness that kind of comes with a world that is extremely fast. And my belief is that creators are the future. I think we haven't even begun to see how powerful creators become, not in their individualness, but in the collectiveness of all of them. And the reason why is because they're the most pure form of the organism, right? And so the way I kind of think about that is if you look at a tree, it is no single leaf is important, but if you remove all the leaves, the tree dies, right? Every single one of us is a single leaf as part of a larger tree. And that kind of analogy happens everywhere in nature, right? Your body has 85 trillion cells that all add up to you, right? Instagram has 4 billion creators that add up to the content on there. And it sounds a little bit esoteric, but it's actually the organism underneath that is evolving and growing over time. And so the reason why I think about that is it just allows me to look at examples in nature of what this thing is and where it could be headed, which ultimately gets me excited because nature has this ability to rejuvenate itself over and over and over again. Next, context matters. And so where are we? And the reason why context matters, and I'll get into this a little bit more deeper later, is that content is ubiquitously abundant, right? If you walk into a library, it is not all of the books that matters. It is finding the book that is contextually relevant to you, right? And so there's a lot of stuff that we can cover in this, but trying to figure out like where we are in this process matters because it helps us orient us to where we are today and where we're headed. My belief is that we're still really, really early in this game, really early. Like I'd go bottom of the second. I don't think we really understand what the internet can and will do for humanity, for consciousness, for all of our abilities to express, and for moving the power of the megaphone from 5 people with really loud megaphones into 4 billion people with really small megaphones. And just to put that into context, right? If you take someone like Joe Rogan, he still only has 10 million monthly listeners. Sounds like a lot until you realize it's 0.05% of the people on the internet, right? Like his megaphone is actually really, really small relative to all the other stuff going on. And so we're really, really early in this. And if you're passionate about it, I think we get to be alive at a time where humanity is going to go through the wildest change. Obviously, things are moving really, really fast. TikTok is changing things upwards of 200 times a day that they do on the platform. You have Twitter that's reinventing itself. You have Instagram. You have new things coming out. Everybody is still really fighting to try and figure this out. And my advice, just for anybody in the game, is just kind of like let go of it. Be a part of like riding the wave and playing and create rather than figuring it out. Because there is no possibility anyone is going to figure this out. Information right now, as I mentioned earlier, is absolutely abundant. It's only going to get abundanter. And I know that's not a word, but it just felt really good at midnight last night.
Nice.
And this is where the context matters, is we are all at a fire hose of information. We have more creation tools coming down the pipeline. We have more collaboration tools coming down the pipeline. 5 years ago, what we are doing right now was not a possibility. Now we do it effortlessly on a whim. And with that, we have more communication tools coming online. All of these trends are not going to change. This is making it easier and easier to create content and to play, which means more and more people are going to be creating more and more complex content, right? You start adding AI and generation to this, it's just going to start to see a fire hose of content that I think, once again, we're still really, really early in. Everyone is and will continue to fight for attention. And I put the word fight in air quotes because I think it's a misnomer, is you don't actually have to fight for attention. What's going to end up happening is good content will win. This will be fueled by algorithms, but ultimately the people that build their niches and their audiences will not have to fight because they will have relationships with the people that want to consume what they're creating in a beautiful way, right? And so what I see is the world of algorithms over the next little bit, not just putting up the most hype content like it's doing right now, but actually start to really get to understand the person consuming it and deliver what they need in real time based on where they're at. And some early examples of that is Spotify is already starting to create music from scratch in real time based on the mood you're telling it you're in when you're in it. So you will say, hey, I just got broken up with my boyfriend. He shattered my heart. I just want to rage and feel really sad. Can you make me music? Like that's the level of what we're going into, which obviously is extremely hyper niche there. So looking at where we're going, greater ability to create, greater ability to connect, greater ability to create community, greater ability for ideas to flourish. All of these to me are really, really important because it reminds me of a brain. You end up having a lot more nodes on the network. And at some point, we're going to experience some sort of exponential critical mass upwards that is a step jump from where we are. For people that aren't familiar with critical masses, it's basically a point where the growth rate becomes so rapid, it leads to this like completely unstoppable event. This is a pattern that happens over and over and over and over again in any organism. Humans being that organism, nature. You can see this with viral content where something goes viral and then you can't stop it. It just keeps getting shared. You saw this with tech adoptions of the iPhone, of Facebook. The more people that got on it, the more people that got on it. Something that happens in nuclear reactions, herd immunity, market bubbles and busts, ecological thresholds, cultural shifts. And it's absolutely going to happen in this game that all of us play in called content creation. Where that really, really matters for me is I used to think that I had to stay on top of everything in this thing. And it was completely overwhelming. And I didn't really understand how the hell you could do it. And what I realized is that I was trying to be the entire forest. I was trying to be everything and create content for everything at all times, or at least thought I should, until I realized that we are not the forest. In fact, neither is Facebook, TikTok, Instagram, or WhatsApp. These are all just small little pillars in a greater ecosystem of whatever this exchange of ideas is. Really, we are just simply like one single pillar in the forest. And so when we start to think about it like that, you start to realize that, you know, your job is just to create content in a niche that serves people. And for me, that allowed me to get a lot of clarity of I get to build and create in these verticals and everything else is just noise. What that also really, really leads to is realizing that there's a lot of people to co-create with because you are a part of something larger than just your own individual content channel. And we're starting to see the really, really early trends of this, where 10 years ago, everybody kind of created their content in individual verticals, and their content was their content. You couldn't download stuff off Instagram and re-upload as your own. All that stuff was really, really hard. All of that's changing. Everything now is moving into remixing and recreating other people's contents or ideas in different ways. And we're moving to this phase where you have the cross collaboration of everything. And that's really subtle, but it looks like the way we co-create reels, right? One person creates a really dope soundbite and 50,000 people create a reel on top of it. You know, somebody does one thing and then people share and create memes as communication on top of it. The way we share and communicate and reshare stories, and even the way that we're going to go communicate on Zoom, turn around, take some of this content and share what we learned with the people in our own lives, right? There's this cross collaboration and cross contamination that is happening. And that level for content is only going to continue to get more and more. That gets really complex. And in the words of Macklemore, there's layers to the shit, and it just layers on and on and on and on and on. And it was really interesting because I started off as a photographer and I would take photos, and you want to hold on to those photos as your own. You don't want to let other people steal your ideas, right? Or steal your art. And what I realized really, really quickly is that it's an impossible feat to hold on to your ideas, and that I'm better off actually just letting people create with my stuff. That's the world that we're going into from like an ideas standpoint and a content standpoint. And that works both ways, in the sense of you consuming other people's ideas, remixing them and sharing them out to the world, and then the world taking your ideas, remixing it and sharing it further. This is a really messy process because we don't understand how to attribute credit right now, but it is the world that we're going into, and there's probably no stopping it. And we will figure out how to attribute credit, et cetera, as we go. You're seeing that in the world of artificial intelligence and generative everything. Generative everything is just taking trillions of ideas, mixing it together and putting it out there, right? And so the hard part about this is, how do we attribute credit? Whose idea is it really when it's been built on 35 people's different ideas? But it is the dominant thread, and it's going to continue to move forward, is the remixing of ideas. I heard a really funny thing the other day that it's like, you used to read 10 books and write one. Now we read 2 books and write one, right? And more people are authors, more people have these things. You know, we used to listen to 3 to 4 radios. Now we listen to 3,000 or 4,000 podcasts, turn around and start our own and talk about the same stuff as the accumulation of everything else we consumed. We're remixing reels, we're doing covers, we're doing parodies, we're creating reaction videos to things that happen on TikTok, we're doing the real-time memes, fan fiction, fan art. Like, this is a trend that is just not going away, and it's the cross collaboration of the organism, the larger forest, all coming online. And so why does all this matter? Because we can start to see how the forest is going to mature, right? The individual content creator that has been so dominant for 10 years is going to become one part of something much larger. What that is, I have no idea. But it's going to turn into a global collective consciousness on these platforms, or whatever it turns into. And if anyone's really, really curious, there's a really good YouTube video about why Elon Musk, love him or hate him, spent $44 billion on Twitter. And it wasn't because it was going to make money. It was because the internet needs somewhere centralized in order to house all these collective thoughts. And his whole thing was, he wanted that space to be wide open and free so that humanity could share ideas in whatever way they wanted. When you can start to see how the forest matures, not only does it impact the content you create today, but it impacts the content you create tomorrow. And it gives you a little bit of vision of how to create yourself in a very uncertain and ever-changing world. One kind of last note, all this content is a living, breathing organism, and we are all part of it, right? It's an adaptive system that we all, for whatever reason, get a chance to play in and create, which to me, I think is really cool, right? It's a fractal of the human body. It's a fractal of a larger organism. It's the same thing happening over and over and over again. That gives us permission to stop playing the game and just start sharing our creations, right? You can win in the short term, just trying to figure out how to hack the algorithm, but you can never win in the long term doing that. My belief is that nature has to express itself, and content is just the mode of our humanity being true to itself right now. It just happens to come through a digital lens that, for the first time in history, allows us to speak to up to 4 billion people on the other side. And I can't remember who mentioned it earlier, but they were talking about creating content to hit 1 billion people around pain. 20 years ago, that was not only laughable, it was impossible. Today, if you created a video that resonated with humanity tonight, you could hit 4.5 billion people. That is the world we live in. And to me, that is just the wildest thing to start to think about. And in a weird way, there is a beautiful responsibility to put out content that moves the world collectively towards where we want to go. And the platforms themselves will be shaped by the type of content we create, not just the algorithms they create to surface that content. My advice is just simply to put your voice out there and use it to find the people that speak like you, rather than trying to speak in a way that gets to certain people. If you do this, you will win. Because the reason why whatever is inside of you is because it is inside other people. And we're in a very weird place right now, going back to Jenna's content, that we're trying to appease an algorithm because it gives us some kind of mechanism back that we did the right thing. As walls fall down, as more control goes to the creators, we're going to have more and more ability to just speak our own voice and find those people. So use your voice. The people who resonate will end up resonating. And if it's not on Instagram or algorithm controlled stuff, build a mailing list, build Twitter, go create a website, go create a Substack, right? These tools are coming out as a mechanism for us to communicate with people. And this goes true for work and for play. It doesn't matter. And if you do it right, work can become play. And that has happened over and over and over again, where these platforms have allowed people to monetize who they actually are as a human, which I think is super, super, super cool. Any questions on that before I get into kind of like actually creating content?
Yeah, I'll just say, Julian, real quick, incredible. A quick question I have on that. And by the way, guys, as we go on this, blast questions in the chat, and then we can kind of be organized as we get to them. I got a couple in the private, and we'll kind of queue them up. Julian, for you, when you think about doing this whole like remixing, collective collaboration, blah 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 blah, how do we do this like consciously? So you're like, hey, there's a playground and we're gonna go play, but like, let's do this the right way as an individual, as Josh. How do I go out and do this consciously, the remixing, the collaboration, the creating? What is that like? What does that look like to do that the right way?
I don't think we know. Like I don't think we know what the outcomes are, right? And for me, like my guiding principle is like, does it feel good inside me? You know, and I would say when I was building content, 20, like 5, 6, 7 years ago, everything I did was full of shit relative to what I understand now, because everything was actually like this desire to get reinforcement from people. It was like, if I create X content, the world will like it. And then they'll end up reinforcing some sort of ego structure, like desire for me to be accepted. I think the only way to win in the long run is to find what you're passionate about, put it out into the world, and let the community that you build shape around that. Because everything else is you trying to compete with somebody else beside you that's actually passionate about it, right? And so when you think about someone like Joe Rogan versus other podcasters, and you ask the question, like, why is that guy able to succeed? That dude loves talking to people. He fucking loves it. And he does it 6 to 8 hours a day, 5 days a week, 52 weeks a year. If you're talking to people to try and get some sort of reward from an audience, you're screwed, because you're never going to be as good as him on that, right? And I think what we're going to see over time is that authenticity is going to be the only viable strategy, because otherwise somebody else will outcompete you with how passionate and engaged they are with the thing that you want, and the person listening will just shift to them. And so when you speak about right way, to me, it is just like that inner alignment and not needing to figure it out, right? I think right now we're still, and I know Josh just posted a really cool post on this, like we're still in the guru phase of all this, where we're all trying to be authorities in a space, when in reality, everybody deeply knows nobody has a clue what's going on, right? And I think what the world is craving is the person that goes, I don't actually know, but I have some idea about this, and just start sharing. And that's where you turn around and people go, oh, cool. And I think all you have to do is be a couple steps ahead of somebody in order to have the permission to teach them. And for me, the people that are real in the space recognize that and are so much more willing to connect and collaborate with those people in a way that elevates everybody up. And so I think inauthenticity will die a slow death. Don't get me wrong, there'll always be pockets. There'll always be places where, that thrives. But you're starting to see this in music. You're starting to see this in cinematography. You're starting to see this in all these meaningful ways where like independent, real artists are starting to win in really, really meaningful ways. And if you haven't checked out the story of Connor Price on My First Million, He is a rapper who his wife became his marketing manager, and he just started to rap because he loves it. And he was pretty good at it, not phenomenal, but ended up building a phenomenally engaged audience, and basically went from being a warehouse manager to making $500,000 a month every month in stream revenue.
She's a G, by the way, his wife.
Yeah. Oh, she's right. And
gangster.
it's, and you those stories, you're like, that's possible. That's the world we're moving into. Obviously those are, the upper echelons of what happens, but it's the fact that you're like, that's where we're going. There was no label involved there. There's no man controlling the system. It was just a dude rapping to people that loved what he talked about. And his skits are hilarious. Like, I watch him, I'm like, that's the energy I want to embody in my life. Right. And so the world is starting to reward that stuff more and more. And I think the biggest thing is just to have the courage internally to be that early on when you don't have those feedback mechanisms.
Beautiful. Let's go.
Sick. Awesome.
Love it.
All right. So, action forward to anybody else, or?
I
Great.
think Jenna had a question.
I think she just wanted to show us the dog
Oh,
again.
did I have a question? Like I think I typed a bunch. Oh, like the 2 questions. I was just saying I had another one that I sent privately, but like I don't know. We actually Santana's gone now, but we actually had like a pretty big social media / serial entrepreneur on our call today, and it was about social media. So this is like top of mind for me. And yeah, I wanted to know like what your personal thoughts are on the importance of having like a strategy and having like a very specific process versus just choosing like a persona or message or worldview or perspective or philosophy, like something general that you want to keep to the forefront of your mind. Like, where do those kind of intersect? I was just curious. Like, do you think it's really important to have like a social media content strategy, posting this day, that day, or is it like, I don't know. I don't think there's any right or wrong answer, but I just wanted to know what your thoughts were on that, because I think yeah, I don't know. I think over analytical people can overthink it. And I just wanted to know what your thoughts are of like the balance between having a strategy and plan and then just like sticking true to your value system and like what it is you're actually trying to do.
Yeah, I think it's a really important question. And I think, so I have a fundamental rule in life, and that's don't try and outcompete the robots. We're never going to outcompete the robots because we're not robots. And I think that's always been the really interesting thing to watch, is like, as a human, we have to stick to this Monday at 3 p.m. And, and I think those guidelines are powerful against our own devices that sabotage us, right? If I say I'm going to post it Monday at 1 p.m. and I have a lot of people that are relying on it and come get used to having it, and I know if I don't have that there, I'm not going to post, then all of a sudden that allows me to be there and show up when otherwise I wouldn't. It helps build consistency into what you're doing, but it's also not entirely necessary, right? There's people that post sporadically that are wildly successful. There's people that post 30 times a day that are not successful. I think the one thing that we are moving into is a lot more evergreen content where, and even if you subtly watch on Instagram, like they'll post reels or they'll put reels at the top of your feed that are months old, right? Because the best content is starting to win. It's not just the recency of the content, right? And Mr. Beast, who is arguably probably the best in the world at content, talks about this all the time. He's like, the trick to creating a big thing with content is just create really good content that's timeless. At some point, the world will come and consume it all, right? And so he talks about getting videos to 1 billion views. And he's like, of course, because there's more than 1 billion people on the planet. And if I make good content that will live for 20 years, at some point that'll cross it there. When? I don't know. I don't care. That's not the game I'm in. And so to me, I think, the structure there can be helpful to us as humans, but is not necessary as far as what actually you end up putting out to the world. And if it stresses you out, let it go, right? I think all of this has to be taken through the lens of like, is this stuff making our lives better or worse? And I will always remind people, that there are a whole shitload of wildly successful people you've never heard about because they don't have social media, nor do they care. Right? And so I always remind myself of that, of like, we only ever see the people on social because they have social, they have content. There's still a ton of people that don't, whose lives are great. And so either way, I think actually works. And it's really just about having that internal awareness inside of ourselves.
Oh yeah, brother. Do you want to jump to the next little portion here, Jay?
Yeah, let's do it. So just really quickly, a section on like the actual creating of content. One of the most important things I've ever learned in my life is that people don't resonate with what they see, they resonate with what they feel. And if you can understand that everything you create is about eliciting a feeling inside somebody else, you will do magical things. That exists for blocks of text that people read that go, I felt that. That goes for images you put out. That goes for reels you put together. All of it comes back to a feeling. And you don't control that feeling, but you can have an idea of what you want that feeling to be influenced inside of somebody. And sadly, I think one of the weird parts about this world and why social media feels so weird right now is because the feeling that we use most right now is comparison and jealousy, right? When you realize that you actually have an opportunity to shift that, and you can get really good at making the world feel something and feel something good, you can use content to be really, really beautiful. And so really the way I think about it is all of this wins when it's service media, not social media, right? If you can use these platforms and this content to be in service of other people, sometimes that's education, sometimes that's laughing, sometimes that's a break from what they're doing, sometimes that's showing them the world. Like what it is isn't as important as the means of what it's trying to do. And a lot of that just comes down to like sharing and educating the space that you're in. And if you actually subtly look at the best content creators that aren't trying to be pure entertainers, they're simply sharing and educating to their audience in all sorts of different containers. And I think that is one of the coolest things that we're going into is we don't even really yet know what the bounds of this sharing and creation is. And there's a phenomenally boring business that I'll say boring because it's really, really simple. The topic isn't boring, but all they do is they share about knitting over and over and over again and how to knit this and how to do that. And the little dude that started it, who loved knitting, is now running $100 million a year company, teaching a whole bunch of girls in the Midwest how to knit. And you just sit there and you're like, I didn't know that was possible. Like when the first time I heard that, I was like, that just wasn't in my worldview of something that could exist. And you start to think about it and you go, yeah, that makes a ton of sense. And they've started to get teenagers into knitting and playing. And he's just like, I just love knitting, like most passionate thing I'm about. And you just kind of realize you're like, that's possible now because we own the channels. Right. And so to me, it's just really about sharing what you're passionate about, or if it's strictly business, the value you provide to people. Right. Joss, if it's about money, teach the world about money, teach the world how it works, teach the way, teach why we generally struggle with it, teach what debt is, teach why we get into debt. Like all of that stuff that you're really interested about is applicable to a lot of people. And that goes for basically anything. And once again, going back to that Joe Rogan thing where it's like, he still only has 0.005% of the world as his audience, and yet is wildly successful. You don't need a lot of people, and the internet is filled with billions of them. Next thing is, and this to me is the biggest thing that we're going to go into, is creating real community. It's going to look a little bit different because we're creating real community online, but it is still real community. And when you think about the word community, the thing that a lot of people skip over is that community is literally just common unity. And when you think about it, it's what's the thread that unites you. That's it. You can have a community about anything. And if you understand what that thing is, you can start to build bonds between people, in which case you share things about it, right? And so this Zoom is a really good example of a community that's right now being formed around sharing content and messages with the world, right? You can take that, turn that into a WhatsApp group. For the next 6 months, we share about all the stuff we learned, how we evolved, whether our content's good, right? Like you can turn that into something. And really quickly, you can see how that becomes a ball of energy that gets more and more profound as it grows. But really, that's the future, is creating all sorts of big communities, small community, micro communities on all different levels around the stuff that we're passionate about. I'm probably going to go into that later in more depth after, if anybody wants to, because it's such a deep and profound topic. But if there's any slide you pay attention to, it's this one. The next one, couldn't help it, but Vanilla Ice, stop, collaborate, and listen, right? It is no longer about a one-way projection of our stuff into the world. It is about our stuff into the world and stuff coming back and stuff going back out and stuff, and that whole process of collaboration. The creators that do that over the next 5 to 10 years will grow so much exponentially faster than everybody else because they get to be a part of something bigger. And on a very tactical lesson, this looks like borrowing people's audiences, sharing with people's audiences, cross-collaborating with people's ideas, etc. Really good example is simply Joss having me come on to speak to all of you that I never met. If you want to look at probably the person who to me is the best in the game at this right now, it is Russ, who is an independent artist who has gone from basically nothing to 5 million or 15 million monthly listeners. And now he's starting to bring in other creators and just co-create music together. And it started with a whole bunch of people that were quote unquote below him in number of streams, etc. And it's turned into him now collaborating with Ed Sheeran, right? And what he's realized is that every single track he makes is an opportunity to engage and collaborate artistically with other people. And because of it, he's everywhere now, right? Once again, like that's the world that we're going into. And so if you're getting stuck with content and getting stuck with putting your message out there, find other people in the space that you're in that you can just jump on lives with, or start, faux record a podcast, or take their stuff and share your thoughts on what they posted, right? All of that is just playing together. And if you do so in the spirit of collaboration, it just continues to grow and snowball and grow into a bigger and bigger ball of energy. This one is really, really important, I think. Content is good, but content plus context is better. Explain to people why they need to understand the content you're sharing, especially if it's an education space, right? A lot of the times we're just talking out into the ether and it ends up getting really, really noisy. One of the really, really cool things that we have the ability to do now is understand a little bit more easily who somebody is. This happens a lot more in things like Substacks or email lists, etc. But you can wrap context around content. And so if you have one single message, say whoever was talking about pain, you can start to wrap those different types of pain into different messages, even though your broader message stays the same. This gets a little tactical, but I think it's really, really important as the world starts to continuously create more and more content. And all sorts of tools are going to exist in 3 to 5 years that allow us to do this better. But the more you can speak to the individual, the better off your message is going to resonate and the more that person is going to feel. Really simple thing that I always go back to is just creating the content I wish I had. Just creating the stuff that lights me up. When I want to learn about a topic, I start looking at it and I'm like, nobody's put together everything on this topic in a way that I can digest it in one go. And then I turn around and I go, wait a minute, maybe that responsibility is on me now. And I just turn around, grab that content, put it together and offer it out to the world. And for me, that's been really, really helpful in just guiding how I actually create meaningful content that other people digest. Finally, and last couple slides here, actually creating the content. I think this one's really, really important. And it goes back to what I mentioned in the beginning, creating versus consuming. Creating is almost always boring. It is tedious. Most of the time it pisses me off. I hate the applications, etc. And it never feels the way consuming actually feels. This is what it means to be the difference between an amateur and a professional. Real creativity is just tedious, monotonous, and boring. And anybody who has done anything meaningful in the world of art, and I call all of this actual content from our soul's art, basically understand that this is how it actually operates. And if anybody wants a phenomenal book to read, The War of Art by Stephen Pressfield is arguably the best book on this. And he has this really beautiful quote that is, this is the other secret that real artists know and wannabe writers don't. When we sit down each day and do our work, power concentrates around us. The muse take notes of our dedication. She approves. We have earned favor in her sight. When we sit down and work, we become like a magnetized rod that attracts iron filings. Ideas come, insights accrete. This is what it means to actually be a content creator. And when I say that, it's somebody that sits down and pours their soul into something, building something larger and larger over time, which once again, isn't what it feels like when you consume other content creators, but it's actually what the best ones are doing. And so it's a really, really important thing because I think we don't ever think about that. And then we sit down to go to produce something and we go, why doesn't this feel like the rest of it feels? And it's because producing feels different than consuming. This one is just another one of those weird ones. 99% of content dies a quick and quiet death. As the creator of the content that sat there producing it, that's a really hard thing to swallow. But in reality, no one else noticed. No one cared, right? I've put out tons of content that I guarantee you most people haven't noticed that to me, I'm like really sad about because I'm like, that was, and you just realize that's part of the game. You just continuously produce and don't discount the power of a collective body of work over the individual components of it. Over time, that adds up. And if you look at any good artist, any good creator, anybody who's done anything of substance, the great majority of their work goes largely unnoticed relative to a few key pieces. And you just have to wade through all that. If you're struggling, just create content that talks to one person. Solve one problem. Put it out there for a single tiny person. That's you, your friend, your mom. We don't have any metrics that do this well, but quality of audience engagement always trumps quantity. And it's sad because all the metrics that we have only track quantity and none of them track quality. But you will know as you start to build quality of audience engagement that that is coming, and it will always lead to quantity. If you can understand that, you will win on any single platform ever. This one is arguably one of the most controversial quotes, but the most true. If you steal from one, you're a copy. If you steal from 100, you're original. And that's really the world that we're going into of remixing, right? It's the accumulation of all these ideas coming in, being channeled through your unique brain and put back out to the world. And so as you do that for yourself, you have to realize that others will do that to you. So don't hold on to things. Simply build, create, put stuff out there, let people play with it. Obviously, get credit where credit is due. And more importantly, give credit where credit is due. But use that as an opportunity to collaborate with people rather than just take their stuff, right? Some of the greatest collaborations I've had is because I took somebody else's stuff, remixed it, and gave them a shitload of credit back, saying thank you for the foundation that I just built on top of. That is arguably where this whole thing is going to go and get wilder and cooler and allow us to create art and ideas and concepts and content we've never seen before. And so with that, all of this is really just one big experimentation or experiment, which is where all really good art comes from. And so mostly get out there, go play, go have fun with it. The world is wildly forgiving. It may not feel like that, but there is so much good stuff that is going to come out of this. And once again, if you believe humanity is good, then we all play a really, really powerful role in contributing a small piece into this larger collective thing that will become human consciousness somewhere in the cloud. So I'll wrap it up there. And yeah, any questions, thoughts? I'm always open. And then I love this shit. I think it's super cool. I think we're building something really weird as humanity, which is a whole nother conversation. But I'm just here to play with it, have some fun with it, and mostly collab with people in a way that makes life feel rich, deep, and meaningful.
Let's
back.
fucking go. Let's fucking go. Sorry. I just wanted to say, Julian, thank you so much for that. Lots of screenshots, lots of notes. I'm probably gonna like write 17 substacks off of all the stuff you just shared and take it as my own.
That's
But it's
awesome.
collaborating, right? And but I just wanted to, so thank you so much for that, Julian. Incredible. I have a couple questions queued up. I want to kick it over to Josh real quick because I know he's got some thoughts, questions, and reflections.
Oh, okay, sure. No, I was just every time that Julian talks. So for those of you who don't know, Julian and I spent, I think it was 7 or 8 months together in my office down here in Tulum, Mexico, straight consecutively, where I would show up at 4:30 a.m., walk to the door. He was sleeping we had like a loft office. So I get in, he'd wake up, come downstairs, we have coffee, and we'd just crush all day, every day for months straight. So I've had the privilege of being privy to these rants and these talks. So I will say I have missed this very much. And thank you, Julian. You're one of the most brilliant people that I know. No, I wanted to share, like I had a ton of thoughts going through it, but I did want to share one mental model that I got from this, Julian, and maybe like help me tap the rhetoric if I'm off. But like, from the execution standpoint, if you want to look at this from an equation standpoint, you could take creating what is real for you right now, plus feedback multiplied by time. That's the equation for this. That's how I summarize what Julian just went through, right? And if you take that first part of that fraction, the creating what is real for you now is the only thing that changes. Right. So you can do two things with that. That will shift because of who you are, and what you do does shift over a period of time. And you can just add volume to it. Right. So the two other components of the equation don't change, though. The feedback, which is your own internal feedback of you getting better. I think that's the tool that social media allows us to have, is like there is some feedback there as long as you're not dependent on it. And then time, because the biggest thing that I think few people talk about enough is like you can win by just not quitting when everybody else does. Yeah. Like super easily. so that's, and then like the only other thing that I found helpful with this is like I create for the person I was 2 to 3 years ago. So what Julian just said about, talk to one person, I talk to me, which is why some of my content is like, toughen up, pussy, like basically. So I'm talking to myself back then, but I find it really easy to go down to like, all right, so what does it mean to create stuff that's real for me? Well, it's stuff I've done, stuff I am doing, stuff I've learned, and stuff I've observed, right? You never fail when you go down to those things, even if you're trying to educate people on stuff, like putting it through the lens of this is what I've observed and what I've learned. I'm not trying to preach. I've found that helpful too, but those are just my takeaways from the talk.
I will say, if you want somebody tactical on this stuff, Josh is hands down the tactical human. I'm not the tactical human. I'm not like, where does this shit live in an ocean? How do I collect my ideas? I'm like, what is this ball of energy that's forming that seems to be human consciousness? And I think that's a really, really cool thing, is like, we live in a world that you can find all these different pieces and buy, borrow, beg for their time and say, what is this thing? And it's up to each one of us to take responsibility for what we want to create, to find those different components and thread them together. And all the information's out there. The internet is wildly vast with this information, to the point that it's almost a hindrance. But figure out which component you're stuck with, and then find the people that are doing it and communicate with them. And they're all sitting there on the other end of this device we're all on right now.
Fucking mind blowing. Joe, I want to kick it over to you real quick, and then also, as we're like 18 minutes over and all that, so if you got to jump, it's all Gucci. I'll throw it over to Joe. I got one or two private questions that I'll throw up, and then we'll deuce out and call it a night because it is late and we got stuff to do. So, Joe, go ahead.
Awesome. Yo, Julian, first of all, unreal presentation, man. You got me fired up. Mine's just like right now. So,
Yeah.
but yeah. So like, okay, for going at content creation and collaboration.
Yeah.
So I just thought of this, this thing. I heard about this story. Basically, when you get two like very opposite ideas and then you bring them together, it can become some of the best ideas. So like, for example, there's this swimsuit company that decide to make swimsuits for people who wear burqas. And you think burqas and then the beach are kind of like two opposite things. Because when you think the beach, you think of people, like very clothesless, and trying to show off their bodies. And then on the other side, you have people in the Muslim communities, and they're covering their bodies because that's what they believe in. But maybe some of those people want to be at the beach and they want to look good too, right? So this company created burqas for people in Muslim communities and for swimsuit burqa. So they brought those two like opposite ideas together, and it like blew up to be like $1 billion company. So so just to say like imagine that kind of stuff with content. Like you're saying, it's like the craziest thing that everyone in the world, and every single topic is just like literally a text away now. So like just to think about like what's it mean for like that concept within content creation, where you can go just like reach out to someone who's completely different from you, and you come together to create like the most amazing idea. So wondering what you thought about.
Yeah, like there's unbelievable movie I think everyone should watch called Art and Copy. I don't know if you can't find it, it's like from VHS back in the day, but it's a documentary about a guy named George Lois, who is the godfather of modern marketing. He is who they built Mad Men around, even though he vehemently denies it. And he just has this thing where he is constantly looking for things that are seemingly outrageous, where on the surface you're like, that doesn't make any sense. And then you pause for a second and you're like, huh, okay. And he's like, in that pause means you just tapped on something novel. It's something that is between two poles that nobody's ever really played and connected with before. And the really cool part about the internet is there's so many more nodes on the network to connect. And our job as creators is to start to connect those. And those can be on macro levels that affect the entire planet, like swimsuits and burqas, or it can be in our own little industry, like why has nobody ever done X with money, right? And so you think about something like Airbnb, it actually was born out of that exact same premise. I have a room, why can't I rent it out? Those seem like polar opposite ideas of safe space, random stranger.
Wow,
right?
Unreal.
And then what you realized is that the work that they did was they de-risked that equation. They said, if I was going to have a random stranger in my room, what are the parameters that keep it safe? And that turned into a $100 billion company. If you can start to think like that, you will realize that the world of business and opportunity and problem, like we are literally at the bottom of the second inning, if only. Like we haven't even begun to start to actually solve humanity's problems and put these things together in really meaningful ways for us. And so I love that insight. I think that just like gave me a really cool mental framework for it. But I think that's really the whole point. And I think people get excited when you pitch them on that stuff. You're like, hey, you're here, I'm here, let's play together. Right. And most people are like, cool, let's go.
Yeah, you just got to reach out and make it happen. Like,
yeah.
Nice. I'm fired up.
Oh, yeah. Senor Bustos.
Hey, Julian, first of all, that was amazing. Congrats for the presentation. I really like that it was very complex in a pill. So there were many topics. This was deep. This was actually we could be here until 4 a.m. talking about it because all the topics are really deep. But what struck me was, for example, in the content creation, once I read a little book called, I'm sure many of you know it, Still Like an Artist.
Yeah.
He mentions, I think in that book, he mentions the two types of content, which is one, flow content and stock content. Flow content is that content that it just reminds people that you're still alive.
Yeah.
Maybe a reel, maybe a story, and stock content is what you mentioned, that timeless content, that content that you will remember for in decades or after death. So my question is, how do you balance in between both? And I connected with, for example, I see Instagram as a platform built by default for flow.
Yeah. Because
the feed is just built that way. But if you go to YouTube, maybe YouTube, you search how to make a soup or a coffee, you maybe see at the top a 7-10-year-old video. So that's very interesting. So I think, I don't know, I'm thinking aloud. I see Instagram many times, okay, to capture attention, but then getting them to that stock work. How do you balance that?
Yeah, I think I think you're hitting on like a fundamental, really important tactical topic. And that is just like, how do you leverage all of these things? And I think the one thing we all get confused about is people are there, therefore I need to go. Right? That's not the case, right? Like, and I've gone back and forth with my thoughts on this over and over again. I've talked to Joss about it. Like, his content, the way his brain works is way better on something like Substack and YouTube than it'll ever be on Instagram, right? And it's like walking into, Starbucks and expecting a beer, right? They don't serve beer, they serve coffee, right? And so part of our job is to understand what is the message we're putting out there, what is our expression, and where is the best platform for those expressions, or multiple platforms, or etc. And understanding that like each one of these platforms has their own unique flavor based off their own incentive structure, right? So for Instagram, it's let's give you as short hits as we can, because in between every short hit, we can charge money. So everything they do on that platform is going to be to drive people to continue consuming quickly. YouTube, on the other hand, has realized that if they do that, they kill their platform, right? And so just immediately about that is like, if you need a lot of space to say your message, you're better off on Instagram, or maybe you're better off written, or maybe you're better off in a private community, right? And it's your job to figure out like what that mix is, and also to test, right? And I go back and forth between, I'm a very visual photographer, which loves Instagram, and then I do a lot of thinking about life. And I will tell you with complete certainty that my engagement is really high on my photos and really low on words on Instagram. And I'm cool with that. I'm like, I don't try and seek anything out of that. I share it there because it's easy. But in reality, I'll probably switch almost all of my writing over to Twitter, which is moving into more of a conversational long form dialogue platform done by writing, right? And so that's one of those things where when I said that like not even Twitter or Instagram or Facebook is the forest, they're just parts of the forest. Our job is to figure out where we want to be in this and have the mobility to dance around for what we're trying to do, right? And it's like, if what you're doing requires depth with people, then choose a platform that enables depth, because you'll always be trying to squeeze blood from a stone, if not.
Oh,
Amazing. Thank you.
I don't like squeezing blood from stones. I'm good on that. I feel like I've white knuckled enough in my life. Guys, with that, I got like 6, 7, 8 questions queued up, but just for time, I think we're gonna wrap it here. Julian, I want to say thank you so much, brother. So much good shit. I mean, I have like a lot of pages of notes on this, and like I'm gonna build and create and bug you on a lot of stuff. I threw a link to WhatsApp chat for digital creators. Like, if you guys want to keep the conversation going, it's like that's the place to go do it. This stuff fires me up, and what I really like about this is it's a collective thesis that we're all working on, and like that calms my anxiety around like, oh, am I doing this right, or am I doing enough, or am I doing this? It's like, oh no, like Josh is saying this, Lexi's saying that, okay, Carlos is saying this, Julia's saying, okay, cool. I'm constantly bouncing off and going, okay, working thesis, a little bit better, a little bit better, a little bit better. And it just like, it puts me in a place, because I trust all of you guys, where I'm like, oh no, it's okay. I'm collectively moving in the right direction little by little. And so like that's why I sent each of you this link to this call today, is to get y'all on this working thesis together, because I haven't figured it out. I don't think anyone has figured it out. So Julian, I want to thank you so much. I want to thank you guys for like showing up, and thanks, I think Julian. That's super beautiful, brother. I'll send out this recording to the homies that couldn't make it. And I'll follow up with an email with that recording, and I don't know, probably like some quotes or something, because they're fire. And so yeah, Julian, thank you so much, man.
Thanks for having us on too, Josh.
Thanks for putting it together, man. Like
Julian, and thank you, Josh, for organizing it. This was fucking awesome.
Hell yes.
This
okay,
is
you guys
my
all
thesis of the presentation in real time, right?
Yeah,
like,
exactly
what we're doing, and there is no difference between 9 of us being here and 900 million.
Yep.
Other than scale. But that scale is already built into the infrastructure of all of it.
That will probably be one of the quotes that go out in the email. Okay, guys. Good morning to you guys overseas, and good night to everybody else. Thank you all for your time. Love you all so much, and have a good night.
Amazing.
Josh,
Peace
thank
out.
you. Thank you, Julian.
Very welcome. Reach out anytime.
Lovely to meet